how the
time.
how the community influence how you react, and how like your parents and your morals influence how you act. That's the nurture part.
That's the nurture part. Tell me about the nature part.
Like the environment, like what's around you.
Is nature environment?
Nature, I'm thinking like what you surround yourself with outside of the home, basically.
I think the nature part of it is your genes. Okay? So the question is whether or not you are part of your genes or whether you're part of nurture. Which part of it is socializing? Does that make sense now? Okay. So now what we have is that there's a group of people who say that you are a product of your genes. Okay? Now, they might say that because they could justify if you're a product of your genes, I can justify why you're on the bottom rung of our social system quicker than why you're not. Why I'm on the top and why you're on the bottom. Why you're part of the untouchables and why I'm a part of the province. It's in our genes. Okay? That's what makes you better than you. Okay? Now, so I can argue that because it's in the genes. It's the gene pool. It's the gene pool. So everything that people accomplish, one argument says, is because the genes are there. Okay? And notice that those things are given credence because throughout history we have done things and talked about things like the royal right of kings. Okay? And how some cultures will sit down and say, you were born up out of a royal family. And therefore you're born to lead. Okay? That's a gene pool. Alright? Now, what happens is that means it's biology that's doing it. Okay? Now, and so what happens is that this is what they mean when they use the term biological determinism. Okay? It contends that biology, specifically genetic makeup, almost completely shapes human behavior. Now, you're a criminal because your genes say you're a criminal. Okay? And what happens is that you don't succeed in this society because your genes say you're not supposed to succeed. That's the argument. You're not as bright as this other group of people are because your genes don't allow you to be as bright. Okay? Now,
Can I ask a question?
certainly.
Does that go under, like I saw a documentary on why rapists do what they do.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a whole sensory thing with the difference in the lips, the sensory of the lips, of the difference that you feel when you kiss an adult as when you kiss a child. Something to that effect. And these rapists do not have that sensory difference between adults and children. And so that might be one of the reasons why they do what they do. Does that come under biological determinism?
Well, I think that's what they're arguing. But remember that when you go, there was once upon a time that we went about, now, hear me, okay? That they used to sit down and say this person is a criminal, so they said it was a body type that made them criminals. Okay? Like the criminals were typically muscular and slender and all this other kind of stuff. And then somebody decided that no, it was what they call nephronology. They would say it's the head structure. They would be sitting there and say, see, these criminals all have these little big heads, okay? And they would say it was so and so and so and so. Now, understand, the problem that we have with those kinds of theories is that they also fit the general population. with me? Okay? There are many people in the general population who might kiss a male or female or kiss a child or an adult and not feel any difference in them. That doesn't say anything. Okay? And so the only way you can say it says something is when you say it's exclusive to this group of people. When you do your research, this group of people have this, but you have to say we checked so many people from the normal population and we did not find that. You will notice that when you have a rapist or whatever, you have a select group of people. Very select. Okay? And so you cannot just say that that they're different than a normal population because your sample is skewed.
But there's something in the brain that makes it biological.
Well, that and indeed.
Are you saying, oh, if someone's parents are, maybe your father is crazy or he was a serial killer or something, so his child, his seed, more than likely is going to grow up to be the same way. Is that
Well,
what
this is that's not what I'm saying now. Please understand me. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that there are people who will posit that. Now, as we go through the next 2 or 3 paragraphs, we'll see that that's not necessarily the case. Okay? So, let's go just a little bit further. Okay? Now, this was your biological determinism part. And then you have what we call social determinism. Okay? And that contends that culture and the social environment almost completely shape human behavior. They don't care what your genes say. The culture is going to make a difference to what they're arguing. Okay? One group is saying it's your genes that are making the difference, and the other part is saying it's your culture that is making the difference. Now stay with me. Okay? Now what happens is you get to the point in your chapter where it says genes and social interaction. Okay? It argues that some features of human behavior and personality are influenced by genes, and some behaviors reflect the interaction of genes and the social environment. Okay? Now, for instance, you have your father's nose, it says. Okay? That's genetic. Okay? Now, because genes pass on your hereditary information. That's what the genes do. Okay? Now, and what happens is that these are characteristics that we get basically from our ancestors. But they say now some features of human behavior are also influenced by genes. And here's where your statement comes in. How neurotic, outgoing, open, agreeable, or conscientious, okay, you are is due partly to your genes. Okay? Your genes might decide if you're an outgoing person. Your genes might say that you're conscientious. Now, don't stop you. Okay? It says that's just partly due to genes. In most cases, genes represent the potential for a particular trait. But how those traits are expressed in a particular person depends on the physical and social environment into which a person is born. Now, what do we say? They say social conditions can trigger or counter a genetically linked effect. For instance, if your genes say you are apt to be depressed, okay, you're a depressed person, but your genes say you're predisposed to being depressed. However, if you live around nurturing people who don't believe in all this depression, who keeps everything happy, who say, well, yes, this is part of life, you deal with it, go on, okay? The odds are you're not going to be depressed. But if you live, that's what they say, stay with me, okay? But if you have a gene that predisposes you to being depressed, and you live around people who go around there depressing people, then the odds are you're going to be depressed. So it's a combination of the genes and the culture that they're arguing makes a difference.
So could you use that at when, like, when people reference like entire races or like races? Like, I was watching a movie, and in the movie, I'm not a documentary, but they were saying places like Afghanistan and Iraq, those places, those people, they can never be at peace because war is in their blood, like they're bred in it, like they're always gonna be that way. So is that what that means when you talk about genes? Could you say that?
No, see, here's the problem that we have. Okay? And see, this is why what happens is throughout life you have to pull all of these things together. It's one thing to look at sociology and explain it from a sociological standpoint. It's another thing to explain it from a historical standpoint. It's another thing to explain it from a military standpoint. What you discover is that many of the reasons why some of these countries hate us with a passion is because we may have gone into their countries 25 or 50 years ago and turned their society upside down. And we have gone into these cultures and decided that we're going to split up, we're going to take this European, this little section of the world, and we're going to give this to the Israelis, and we're going to give this to so-and-so, and we're going to give this to so-and-so, and we're going to overthrow this government here and put this in the puppet government that we want, and we're going to do that, and that's why they hate us. And that's why the war is going on. Because we made a political decision way back when, the way we wanted the world to be. And now we are 50 years later paying for that decision. So you can't just say that they're warlike people, because there's almost nobody as warlike as the Europeans. Say that again, there's almost nobody who likes war more than the Europeans. When you look at the way this continent, these two continents here, North and South America, that was war and disease that people from Europe brought over that the native people couldn't deal with. And we discovered that these people were basically docile. And when they came over saying, oh yes, these people don't have any weapons and we can easily subjugate these people. So when Christopher Columbus goes back to Spain, he's ready to tell them, or to Portugal, where the hell he's going back to, he's telling them, look, those folks couldn't live up to us if we wanted to fight. And you discover that historically the only reason why this is primarily English instead of Spanish is because when the British and the Spanish were fighting, the Spanish had a bigger army or navy than the British did. And they put it all in one battle. And then nature sets in. And the ships catch on fire and decimates the Spanish armada when they were about to fight the English. That gave English control of the seas. And then they come over here, and that means that they can then get their troops over here when the Spanish could not. So you see, you have to put all of that into place when we start saying people are warlike.
So when you say the nature versus nurture debate, you're talking about from an individual standpoint?
No, what your book says is, look, okay, I think your book gives you a good idea, okay? I wish I could find the thing in the book, but it says something about what you discover is that if you have two children, and they both have the same genetic makeup, okay? They both have the same mother and father. They both say they might even come from the same egg, okay? You have two children, they're twins. They come out of the egg. One of them goes into a nurturing family, okay? Somewhat affluent, so they eat all the time and everything else. And the other one goes into a more poor family. They say you look at those kids 20 years from them, and you'll just from that point, and you'll see that one of them is a foot taller than the other one. They have the same genetic makeup. You understand what I'm saying? But the culture that they were both in and the socialization that they went through differed. Okay? So those are the kinds of things that happen. Now, and they have tried to show this in many cases. Okay? And so you don't know, it's just that what happens is that you could have the genetic propensity, or your genes might say you're predisposed to be a certain way, but the culture sets in. And if the culture supports what your genes are predisposed to do, you will do it. If the culture does not support it, you won't. Does that make sense? You want me to say that again? If you're predisposed to do something, and the culture that you're in supports what your gene pool says you should be doing, then you will do it. But if your culture says no, that all the socialization and things that you go through does not support your genes, then you won't do it. Okay? Because the culture and the genes will sort of counterbalance each other. And I think that's what your book is saying. Okay? Stuff is getting complicated. Now notice that nobody is saying you have to agree with this. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is that you understand that there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different theories on what is going on. This is what we talked about when we started talking about conflict theory and structural functional theory and symbolic interaction. There are different ways and approaches to looking at something. And so all you're trying to do is say, well, which one, and usually what you discover is that it's the combination of those things that are making the difference. Not one of them can you find true. Okay? Now, now there are a couple of things that we needed to do, because see, I was asked, well, we're going to discuss needs, I, and need today. And it looks like we can't get there, okay? But what I want you to do is that notice that we are moving to the point where we're going to talk about culture, power, and the social self. And here we're going to talk about children who were brought up without a culture, so to speak, or who came into this life without culture, okay? And what socialization could or could not do for them. That's number 1. Number 2, we're going to talk about who's looking their self. Because you have to understand that when you get through sociology and most of the other social sciences. And then we're going to talk about me and his I and me. Okay? And then we want to talk about what stages we go through again. Notice there's a repetition of how we become socialized. And then finally we'll talk about so-called powers and regimes. Now, my thinking is that I'm very seriously thinking that when we leave chapter 6, that I think that we can do one of 2 things. I'm leaning towards our moving to chapter 15. I think that's